This is a whole bunch of stuff that I use when I go backpacking or when I go on day hikes. I select different pots and pans and components from this bin, and I found them very useful. So in this video, I want to talk about some of the pots and pans that I have experience with in terms of lightweight pots and pans for backpacking, and then a system that I've come up with that works really well for me and that you might find useful for your needs and purposes. So we're just going to get some of these pots and pans out. Some of this stuff is very affordable, like this Msr Seagull pot. Other stuff is more expensive, like this titanium Snow Peak cup. So we've got affordable stuff, we've got expensive stuff. Another expensive item here is this titanium teapot from Msr. We've got other things. We've got an old school Canteen Cup. This Msr Big Cook Set is the one I got initially many years ago and thought was going to just be awesome. And I found it's giant, it's heavy, and although it can be very useful, it's bigger and larger than I tend to need when I'm on a backpacking trip, 2 or 3 day backpacking trip, just by myself or with 1 or 2 other people. This tends to be a little bit too large. I really like the Sea to Summit, these little eating bowls. They're great, and so if I have the space and I'm not so worried about weight, I tend to take them with me. A frying pan is an awesome thing to have. An omelet with hash browns early in the morning is an excellent thing to be able to enjoy, whether you're on a backpacking trip or even car camping. So I love having a nice frying pan. And of course, you're going to need fuel for your stove. So we'll get the rest of this stuff out of here, and then we'll talk a little bit about it. So, a lot of people like these little cups that go on the bottom of Nalgene bottles, and they intend to do most of their cooking in a little cup like this. And while that will work in a pinch, it's not really the way I like to cook long term for 2 or 3 days. I don't want to cook every meal in a little cup like this, even a canteen cup. That doesn't really excite me. Especially if it's a multi-day thing. On a day hike, this is just a great way to go. You got your water, you got your cup to heat things up, heat the water up or boil things in, and you're just fine. You can go with a lighter weight, much more expensive little cup like this titanium cup or cooking pot. It even comes with a little lid that goes on it nicely, and a little bag to hold everything all together. But we're talking $50, $60 here for that cup, if my memory serves me right. So you got pots and pans, you got all kinds of things. In the camping world, little systems like this Msr cook system have been predominant. I think maybe more popular 10, 15 years ago, but that require a little handle. So technically you've got a frying pan here, although you can see I fried things in it and it bent the pan all up. It crinkled the pan up because I got it too hot. And stuff really sticks to this, whereas a non-stick pan is worth its weight in gold in terms of not having things stick to it, but also clean up. You don't spend all your time washing your pots and pans. This is a disaster to actually use as a fry pan, although you can use it in other ways. So this kind of a system that uses a little pot grabber can be useful. It does make things smaller. You don't have giant handles sticking off items, but it can be a little more complicated, and especially if you're cooking on 2 stoves, who has the little pot grabber? Do you need an extra one? Things like that. So I like this little Msr Cooking Kit. I like having the cutting board. You can see I've got it set up with stuff. But what I find is this just is big and heavy and takes up a lot of room. So this just takes up a lot of room and is relatively heavy. And I find that I have stopped taking it. It's a great system, especially if you're cooking for 2, 3, 4 people and you need to boil larger amounts of water, or you're going to do a lot of cooking. In the last 4 or 5 years, I've transitioned from using foods that I have to boil and actually cook to packages like this from Msr or from Alpine Air, where in essence you just pour boiling water. Just add boiling water to this meal. Wait 10-15 minutes, and then you're ready to go and you're able to eat your food. I've transitioned to that kind of food away from things even as simple as ramen noodles, where I actually have to have a pot where I boil them for 2 or 3 or 4 minutes. Items like this from Valley Food Storage, the Irish Pub Cheddar Potato Soup, they require that you actually cook the food, okay, for a relatively extended period of time. We're talking about cooking for 8 to 10 minutes. So actually boiling this mix in your pot or in your pan. So this takes more time, and it means that you need more dishes and things. I can eat directly out of these little packages, and I really like that. I've optimized my little cooking kit for eating these meals, these freeze-dried meals where you just add water to them. Out of all these, the system that I use the most, the pot, the pan that I use the most, whether that's for a day hike or a multi-day backpacking trip, is this little GSI Outdoors Glacier stainless steel kettle. This is not the Kettlist. The Kettlist is a similar profiled pot from GSI, or kettle from GSI, but it is made out of aluminum. That's the Kettlist. This is the stainless steel version. So I think the technical name for this thing is the GSI Outdoors Glacier Stainless Steel Kettle. And it holds 32 fluid ounces, 1 quart. So I've cleared everything out of the way, gotten rid of all the clutter so we can just focus on this little stainless steel kettle. I want to point your attention first to this little shock cord here. I tried rubber bands, I tried paracord, and 50 cents, a little 50-cent piece of shock cord did fix my problem. I've got a bunch of important things that I want to keep together in this pot, that I like to store in this pot. And when I used rubber bands or paracord, inevitably that stuff fell off and the item spilled out. With this little tiny piece of shock cord, I just slip it through there and I loop it over the little end of the handle that protrudes on either side of the teapot, and it's perfect. Now I can have a self-contained unit that goes nicely in a day pack, does really well in a larger multi-day backpack, and is just a self-contained unit that I can take with me. And I've got my stove, all the components I need for starting fires, whether that's a fire or lighting my stove, and then eating utensils and other things. So I'll show you what I keep in this little pot. The first thing I keep in this pot is a little Sea to Summit cup. This is a little silicone cup. I use this as a measuring cup because the freeze-dried meals that I tend to eat with this setup, they require specific amounts of fluid, and sometimes that varies depending on the meal. And if you don't have an easy way of measuring it out and you eyeball it, you either have a meal that is soggy and soupy or a meal that's not fully cooked. So having a measuring device is very important. I also use this little cup to eat from. Another thing that I like about this little silicone cup is it has no metal in it. All right, so a lot of times when I drink from a metal cup, if the soup or the coffee or the hot cocoa or whatever's in it is too hot, it kind of burns your lip around this edge. And I like the fact that the silicone cup insulates my hands a little bit from the heat, and it doesn't ever burn my lips. So I love the fact that it folds up easily and fits right there in the top of my little kettle. This is a little pouch that I have commandeered as my little fire kit. And so the first thing you'll notice that I've got in here is this little piece of 550 cord with a whistle and a fire steel on it. And I like to have this when I go either on day trips or backpacking trips. Emergency fire. I've got enough paracord that I could probably make a bow drill set if I needed to, and a whistle to signal for help. And I want to have that with me, but if I throw this in one of my packs, it tends to float around and get lost, whereas when I cook it and keep it in my cooking kit, I don't lose track of it. So there you go. Then I have some UCO survival storm matches with some tinder in there. I'm very fire centric in this little pouch. I've got another fire steel that I tend to keep in this once I'm out hiking or backpacking, and it works really well. This one happens to be from Light My Fire. Then I have a Vic Cigarette Lighter. I always keep one of these on me, and I like having this. This is what I tend to use to light my stove, start my fires as a general rule, but I have these other additional ways of starting fire in case this breaks or cracks or I lose it. Or what generally happens is I give it out to somebody on the backpacking trip if it's a trip with multiple people because they didn't bring one. So then I have some Vaseline and some makeup removal cotton pads, and I dip the Vaseline onto the cotton pad and I use that to start my fire. I also use the Vaseline if I'm on a multi-day backpacking trip where I haven't been able to bathe. I use the Vaseline to help minimize chafing. I have my little pocket rocket. This is one of the original pocket rockets, not the Pocket Rocket 2.0. I really like the pocket rocket. I have 2 of these, and I see no reason to upgrade because they're working really, really well for me. I then have 2 spoons because 2 is 1 and 1 is none. And this also sets me up so if Mrs. TheGearTester and I head out on a day hike, I've got spoons for both of us. These spoons fold out, so they fold down and they fold out, which is really nice in terms of fitting them in this. But it also means that on larger meals, these freeze-dried meals that have the larger pouch, I don't have to cut the pouch down. I can just reach the food all the way to the bottom with this extended spoon. So those are little items that I keep in the little GSI teapot. You're going to also, of course, need fuel canisters for whatever stove you're going to be using. Now, if I'm going to be eating food that requires that I boil it or simmer it for an extended period of time, I don't tend to do that in this teapot. I tend to do that in this little Msr Seagull pot. This is the Msr Seagull pot that holds 775 milliliters, basically 26 ounces in it. And I can fit all the items that I've shown you here into this pot as well. So if I'm going to be doing something even as simple as ramen noodles, I leave the GSI Glacier stainless steel kettle home, and I take this little Seagull pot just because it's easier to access the food and easier to cook it. If I'm doing something like this Irish pub cheddar soup from Valley Food Storage that requires that I'm going to kind of boil it and then simmer it for 8 minutes, okay, I'm going to use the little pot. It's just easier and simpler. You could totally do it in the teapot if that's all you had, little kettle, but it's just simpler to have this pot. If I'm going on a multi-day trip with another person, if I've got a companion, I tend to take the teapot and then I give them this with some other items in it, and we have both these pots, or the pot and the kettle, with us. And I do that because I like the fact that I can put this over a fire. I got the stainless steel version of the GSI kettle rather than the Kettlist, which is made out of aluminum, because it's easier to clean this from the ash and residue that builds up on it when you cook over a fire. And what I like to do is cook my food and do different things with this on my stove, all right? And then I always have hot water ready to go to do things like dishes or have a hot beverage on this over the fire. That's really my optimal little cooking kit. But on a day hike, I just take one of these with me. So I hope that this video has been helpful to you as you've considered how you might modify or adjust your wilderness cooking equipment. If you like this video, I would encourage you to subscribe to my channel. If you'd like to support my channel, you can do so by purchasing products from our sponsors, affiliates, and friends. Companies like Firebox Stoves, Excess Sites, Valley Food Storage, and Occam Defense Solutions. Thank you very much for your views and your subscriptions. This is the Gear Tester signing off.